In the scorched silence of the Sierra Nevada, where the forest still smoldered from the great fire, a starving mountain lion stumbled upon a wounded fawn, tiny, helpless, trapped beneath a burned branch. Instinct should have made her strike, end the struggle, and survive another day. But instead she paused, bowed her head, and in that impossible moment, changed what the world thought it knew about survival. The fire had burned for 9 days, and then it was gone, leaving the Sierra Nevada in a silence so heavy it felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. Pines that had stood for centuries now bowed as blackened skeletons against a gray sky. The wind carried the smell of ash and wet bark, a reminder of what used to be alive. Beneath the stillness, the snow began to fall again, trying to cover what the fire had taken. From the far ridge, a lone mountain lion moved through the ruin. Her coat, once golden, was now streaked with soot. Her right flank bore a half-healed scar from the blaze. Hunger gnawed at her ribs, but deeper than that was another hollow, the memory of her 2 cubs, lost when the flames closed in on their den. Since that day, she had hunted out of instinct, not will. She walked quietly, paws sinking into snow softened by heat from the scorched earth below. The forest around her was unfamiliar now, stripped bare. Where there had been deer paths, there was only char and frozen mud. Yet the mountain lion moved with the steady rhythm of an animal that had seen too much to be afraid anymore. The wind changed. She froze, ears tilted forward. There, beneath the whisper of snow, came a small sound. A cry, thin and uneven, almost swallowed by the cold. She followed it down a slope littered with fallen branches, each step careful, silent. The sound came again. At the base of the slope, where a pine had collapsed and split, a small shape struggled in the ash. A fawn, barely old enough to stand, its coat mottled with soot and melting snow. One hind leg twisted under a heavy branch. The tiny creature kicked weakly, eyes wide and glassy. The mountain lion watched, her muscles tightened out of habit. Hunger sharpened her focus. She could end it quickly, a single strike, a meal that might keep her alive through another storm. That was nature's law, as old as the mountains themselves. But she didn't move. She crouched, head low, breath slow. The fawn made a sound again, a soft, helpless bleat. The lion blinked, her ears flicking back. She stepped closer, snow crunching beneath her paws. Her nose brushed the air between them, catching the scent of fear and burnt wood. The smell of innocence and ruin mixed together. The fawn tried to crawl, but the branch held firm. Its eyes met hers, wide with a confusion that wasn't fear anymore. It was surrender. Something shifted in the lion's chest, something old and buried beneath instinct. She exhaled, a long, heavy breath that rose as steam in the frozen air. Instead of striking, she raised one paw and pushed gently at the fallen branch. It didn't move. She pressed harder, claws digging into bark. With a dry crack, the branch rolled aside. The fawn kicked free and fell onto its side, breathing hard. The mountain lion stepped back, watching. She expected it to run. It didn't. It simply lay there, shivering, legs trembling too much to stand. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing against the snow that drifted between them. From somewhere high above, a raven cawed, its cry echoing over the ridge. The lion looked up, then back at the fawn. The sky had gone darker, the storm returning. She turned and began to walk away, leaving the small creature where it lay. But after only a few steps, she stopped. The wind came harder now, whipping through the burnt trees. The fawn let out a faint bleat, barely audible. The lion turned again. Her body moved before her mind could stop it. She walked back to the fawn and lowered her head, sniffing at its side. The small heart beneath that fragile rib cage was still beating, weak but steady. She could smell the cold creeping in, the kind that kills quietly. Snowflakes gathered on the fawn's eyelashes, melting and freezing again. The mountain lion let out a low rumble in her chest, not quite a growl, more like a sound she once made to call her cubs close. Then, slowly, she lay down beside the fawn. Her body heat spread through the snow, a living blanket against the bitter air. The fawn flinched, then relaxed. Its small body pressed against hers, trembling until the warmth took hold. The lion rested her head on her paws, eyes half closed. Outside, the storm built itself into a wall of white, sealing them in together. At the ranger station miles away, the screens flickered with static. A drone camera, half buried in snow, still caught fragments of motion, a faint blur of gold curled beside a smaller shape. Ranger Daniel Reyes leaned forward, rubbing his tired eyes. "Is that the same lion?" one of the younger techs asked. Daniel squinted. "It's her," he said. "But what's she doing?" The image stabilized for a second, just enough to show the impossible. A predator sheltering a prey animal, not for hunger, but for something else. Daniel's hand hovered over the radio. He thought about calling it in, but something in the quiet of that screen stopped him. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside the cave, the mountain lion lifted her head once, watching the white world beyond the entrance. Her breath fogged the air in small bursts. She blinked slowly, then lowered her head again beside the fawn, her eyes glowing like embers in the dark. For the first time since the fire, she wasn't running from anything. She was simply there, alive, still, and not alone. The storm howled through the valley, erasing tracks and sound. In the heart of the wilderness, a single act of mercy rewrote the night. And somewhere between ash and snow, survival began to mean something new. Morning came slowly, the kind of gray dawn that hides the line between night and day. The storm had passed, leaving the mountains blanketed in deep, white silence. The forest steamed faintly where warmth still rose from burned earth, and icicles hung from blackened branches like crystal daggers. Inside the half-collapsed cave, a small movement broke the stillness. The fawn stirred, blinking against the dim light filtering through snow. Beside it, the mountain lion lifted her head. Frost rimed her whiskers. Her breath came out as white clouds that rose, vanished, and came again. She watched the fawn shift, its body trembling from cold and hunger. The lion's stomach tightened with her own hunger. Instinct whispered, "Feed, survive." But she didn't move toward the small creature. She only watched. When the fawn tried to stand, one leg gave out beneath it. The lion rose slowly, stretching her stiff limbs, then padded toward the entrance. Snow had sealed it almost shut overnight. She pushed her weight against the drift, muscles straining, until a shaft of cold light poured in. Outside, the world shone blindingly white. She stepped out and inhaled deeply. The scent of the forest was different now. Sharper, cleaner, washed of smoke, but still empty of prey. The wind carried faint traces of life. Pine, frozen water, the distant call of a raven. Behind her, the fawn whimpered softly. The sound made her pause. She turned, ears tilting back toward the cave. The small body was curled against the cold earth, ribs rising too fast. The lion crouched, sniffing the air again. She could smell the fawn's fear, but also the fragile pulse of life. Instead of walking away, she began to dig. She scraped at the snow outside the cave entrance with powerful strokes of her paws, uncovering patches of moss and the brittle tips of pine needles. Beneath them, she found what she was searching for: sprouts of green poking through the ash, tender shoots hidden from the storm. The lion lowered her head, brushed the snow away, and stepped aside. She turned toward the cave and gave a low, rumbling sound. Not a growl, but a coaxing call. The fawn hesitated, then struggled to its feet and hobbled toward her. It sniffed the ground, then bent its head and began to chew. The movement was slow at first, unsure. The lion stood watch, scanning the tree line. Her tail flicked once, steady and alert. For the first time since the fire, the mountain was quiet in a way that felt alive again. Miles away, at the ranger outpost, Daniel Reyes leaned closer to the drone monitor. The feed had stabilized now that the weather had cleared. He watched, amazed, as the image sharpened. A mountain lion standing guard over a small deer that nibbled at shoots she had uncovered herself. His assistant leaned over his shoulder. "Is she feeding it?" Daniel's voice was hushed. "No. She's showing it where to feed." "That's impossible," the younger man said. "Predators don't teach herbivores to eat." Daniel didn't answer. He just stared at the screen, a strange ache rising in his chest. Through the drone's microphone came the faint sound of the lion's breath and the rustle of snow shifting under hooves. The fawn raised its head once, looking at the lion and then back at the ground. Trust was forming, delicate as frost. By midday, the light changed. The sun, weak but present, turned the snow into a mirror. The lion led the fawn along a narrow ridge toward a patch of exposed ground near a frozen stream. There, she stopped, crouched low, and sniffed the air. The ice had begun to melt along the edges. The fawn followed, cautious but curious. It lowered its head and licked at the water that pooled between rocks. The lion stayed close, her shadow falling over the smaller creature like a silent promise. She watched the forest beyond, ears twitching, muscles tight, ready to defend. Daniel's radio crackled. "Reyes, HQ wants an update. Is that the same lion?" He pressed the button. "It's her. Status?" He hesitated. "She's teaching the deer to live." A long silence followed, then static, then laughter. Short, disbelieving. "Copy that, Reyes. Make sure your footage is clear. That kind of story sells itself. Maybe we can spin it into a conservation campaign. People love that stuff. Wild compassion, survival, hope. Great for the tourism board, great for funding." Daniel didn't respond. He turned the radio off. Out on the ridge, the mountain lion had stretched out on a flat rock, eyes half closed in the pale sunlight. The fawn lay curled near her front paws. Steam rose from their bodies, thin ribbons of life in the frozen air. The lion's ears flicked toward a faint rustle in the distance. She rose instantly, head high. The fawn tensed. From across the valley came the lonely echo of a coyote's howl. The lion's body stiffened, tail lashing once in warning. She moved to the edge of the ridge, scanning the trees below. For long minutes, nothing happened. Then the wind shifted again, carrying only silence. The lion returned to her place beside the fawn, still alert but calm. Daniel watched until the screen blurred with static again. The drone battery blinked low. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The forest outside the outpost was quiet, its white expanse untouched. He opened his notebook, hesitated, then began to write. Day 2. The predator uncovered food for prey. No aggression. Possible case of environmental empathy. He stopped, frowning. The words felt too small for what he had seen. He crossed out the last line and wrote instead. Day 2. The predator paused, and something in nature changed with her. Outside the outpost, the sun dipped behind the ridge, and the world turned blue. Up in the mountains, the lion and the fawn settled once more beneath a sky of frozen stars. The wind pressed snow against the cave like a seal, and the forest breathed its first calm breath since the fire. That night, Daniel sat alone in the quiet hum of the generator, watching the replay again. A predator that chose mercy, a fawn that learned to trust. For years, he'd thought he understood the wild, its patterns, its brutal simplicity. But what he'd seen today felt like something entirely new. As he turned off the lights, he looked out across the valley. The snow glowed faintly in the moonlight, unbroken except for one winding trail. 2 sets of prints, one large, one small, weaving side by side through the silver world. Somewhere beyond that horizon, the mountain lion paused again, lifting her head to the night sky. The stars caught in her eyes like small fires. Reflections of something old, fierce, and suddenly gentle. And for the first time in a long time, the forest seemed ready to listen. The 3rd day after the fire dawned blue and brittle. The sun rose weakly through the mist, touching the mountain tops with pale gold. Down in the valley, frost had stiffened the snow into glass. The wind had stilled, leaving behind a silence so clear it carried every crack of ice and distant flutter of wings. Inside the cave, the mountain lion stirred. Her breath steamed in the cold air. Beside her, the fawn slept curled like a question mark, its sides moving softly beneath its speckled coat. She watched it for a moment before rising, careful not to disturb the fragile peace between them. Hunger gnawed at her again, but something else had begun to take its place, a pull stronger than instinct. She padded toward the entrance, nose lifted. The scent of pine and melted frost carried the promise of life. When she stepped outside, the snow crunched under her paws, crisp and shallow now after days of stillness. The world was brighter than before, and for the first time in months, she could hear water running. Somewhere beneath the ridge, a stream had begun to thaw. The lion moved quietly toward the sound. She followed the winding path until she found it, a thin ribbon of silver cutting through the white. The ice along its edges glistened like glass. She crouched, drank deeply, and then began pawing at the snow along the bank, uncovering patches of brown earth and the tender shoots that had survived beneath. Back at the cave, the fawn had woken. Its nose twitched at the unfamiliar scent of running water. It struggled to stand, legs wobbling, but the lion was already returning. She paused a few feet away, watching as the fawn limped toward her uncertainly. She turned, stepped aside, and led it down the slope. They reached the stream together. The fawn lowered its head and began to drink, slow at first, then faster. The lion stood beside it, eyes scanning the horizon. The breeze shifted, carrying faint danger, an echo of coyotes in the distance. Her tail flicked once, tension traveling through every muscle. She waited until the wind changed again, until the sound faded, then relaxed. For a while they stayed there, the predator and the prey, framed by sunlight and snowmelt. The lion lowered her head, brushing the fawn's flank with her whiskers as if to reassure it. Then she turned and began walking back toward the shelter. The fawn followed, its steps uncertain but stronger than before. From his chair at the outpost, Ranger Daniel Reyes watched the drone feed in silence. He had seen thousands of hours of animal footage, but nothing like this. "She's teaching it to find water," he murmured. His assistant leaned in. You think she's confused? Maybe her cubs died in the fire and she's transferring that instinct. Maybe, Daniel said. But confusion doesn't look like that. He zoomed in on the live feed. The lion was pacing the cave's perimeter, scraping away snow and branches. She dragged fallen pine needles and arranged them loosely along the ground, creating a shallow bed. The fawn lay down in the middle of it, ears flicking. The lion curled around it once again, her tail wrapping protectively over its hind legs. Daniel rubbed his eyes. She's building a nest. Cats don't nest, his assistant said. Apparently this one does. The footage rolled on through the day. Around noon, the lion stood, left the cave again, and returned with clumps of moss and bark, lining the floor where the fawn slept. Later, she dug small trenches at the mouth of the cave, as if directing meltwater away from their sleeping spot. Every action was deliberate, purposeful. By mid-afternoon, clouds gathered again over the ridge. The temperature dropped sharply. Snowflakes began to fall, light at first, then thick and heavy. Daniel adjusted the drone altitude for a wider view. The lion could be seen near the tree line now, digging at the base of a fallen pine. When she stepped aside, Daniel saw what she'd uncovered, a cluster of green shoots sheltered by the log's shadow. The fawn, struggling to climb down from the cave, followed her trail. It sniffed the tender leaves and began to nibble. The lion watched quietly, eyes half-lidded, posture calm. Every few moments, she looked around the forest as though daring anything to come near. Daniel exhaled softly. She's showing it what's safe to eat. Impossible, the assistant muttered again. But even he sounded uncertain. Snow thickened. The world dimmed. By nightfall, the forest had become a cathedral of white and shadow. Inside the cave, the fawn slept close against the lion's chest, its tiny body rising and falling with her breath. The lion stayed awake for hours, watching the mouth of the cave, ears twitching to every distant crack of ice. At the outpost, Daniel made another entry in his logbook. Day 3. The predator maintains protective behavior. No aggression observed. Shared shelter established. The fawn now depends on her for warmth and safety. Behavioral precedent, none. He hesitated, pen hovering, then added, the lion's actions suggest intention beyond instinct, possibly empathy. He read the line twice, shook his head, and closed the book. The word felt too human, but he couldn't think of another. Outside, wind swept over the snowdrifts, reshaping them into new forms. The forest looked untouched, but life had quietly begun to rewrite itself. Beneath a canopy of frost, one unlikely pair survived because one creature had chosen not to follow her nature. Deep in the cave, the lion finally let her head rest on her paws. The fawn shifted in its sleep, pressing closer. The lion blinked slowly, golden eyes reflecting the dim glow from the snow outside. Her tail flicked once, gently, and the world settled into stillness again. That night, Daniel sat by the radio, unable to sleep. The headlines from the outside world, fires, floods, the economy, insurance commercials about protecting what matters, played through his mind like noise. But here, in this frozen corner of the Sierra, something wordless and pure was happening. He looked once more at the frozen monitor. Two shapes, predator and prey, breathing together in the dark. He turned off the light, leaned back, and whispered to himself, if mercy can exist here, maybe there's hope left everywhere. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft, endless, forgiving. By the 4th day, the storm had cleared, but the mountains looked as if the world had started over. Everything was clean, white and quiet again. an empty page. The silence wasn't peace, though. It was the kind that comes before something changes forever. At the ranger outpost, Daniel Reyes sat hunched over a map, tracing the faint coordinates of the lion's GPS signal. The drone had frozen in the cold, its feed offline. For nearly 12 hours there had been no movement, no sign of life from the ridge where the lion's den was hidden. The data said she was still there. The stillness on the screen told him something was wrong. He closed his notebook and looked toward the window. Snow had stopped falling, but the sky was low and bruised with cloud. She should have moved by now, he said quietly. His assistant shrugged. Maybe she finally left the deer behind. Daniel shook his head. No, that's not how this story ends. He pulled on his parka, ignoring the younger ranger's protests. HQ said no excursions, the boy reminded him. Then I won't tell them where I'm going, Daniel said, grabbing his field pack. Within minutes, he was driving into the mountain's shadow, tires crunching over ice. The forest rose around him, black trunks, white snow, no color in between. When the road ended, he continued on foot, the GPS blinking faintly in his gloved hand. The climb was brutal. Snow reached his knees. The air burned in his lungs. He thought of the headlines that used to fill his office inbox. Insurance ads promising security. Conservation reports preaching about risk management. None of it meant anything up here. Up here, survival wasn't a policy. It was a choice made moment by moment, heartbeat by heartbeat. After an hour, he reached the ridge. The cave was just ahead, a dark cut in the hillside, half covered by snowdrifts. Daniel slowed his steps, crouching low. The air smelled of pine, ice, and something else. Wild, sharp, alive. Then he saw her. The mountain lion stood at the cave's entrance, muscles taut, tail flicking in small arcs. Her head was lowered, eyes locked on something moving in the trees below. Daniel lifted his binoculars. 3 coyotes, lean and desperate, were climbing the slope toward her. Hunger had brought them higher than usual, closer to her shelter. Daniel froze. The lion's ears flattened. She gave a sound that wasn't quite a roar, but carried through the valley like thunder. The coyotes slowed, weaving apart, trying to flank her. Behind the lion, Daniel caught a flicker of movement. The fawn, pressing itself deeper into the shadows. The first coyote lunged. The lion moved faster than his eyes could follow, a blur of muscle and gold. Snow exploded around her as she struck, claws raking through air and fur. The second coyote darted from the side. She spun and drove it back with a snarl that echoed off the frozen cliffs. Daniel felt his own heart hammering, lifted his rifle, then hesitated. She didn't need help. She was the storm. The last coyote hesitated too long. The lion lunged, landing squarely between it and the cave. It backed away, whining, before disappearing into the trees. Then, for a long moment, everything stilled. The lion's chest heaved. Her fur was streaked with blood, some of it her own. She turned her head toward the cave, and Daniel watched as the fawn crept forward, trembling but unharmed. The lion lowered her head to the small creature, brushed her nose against its back, then collapsed beside it in the snow. Daniel lowered his rifle and exhaled. "You did it," he whispered. "You actually did it." He waited until her breathing steadied, then stepped closer, boots sinking deep into the drift. She saw him immediately. Even from 20 feet away, her gaze hit him like a weight, ancient, fierce, aware. He stopped where he was, hands open, trying to make his presence small. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quietly. His voice cracked in the thin air. The lion didn't move. Her ears twitched toward him, but her body stayed relaxed, one paw resting protectively in front of the fawn. Daniel's breath fogged the air between them. "You don't know it, but the world's watching you," he said softly. "They're calling you a miracle." The lion blinked once, slow, deliberate. Then she turned her head away, as if the man and his world didn't matter at all. Daniel stood there until his fingers went numb, then slowly backed down the slope. He stopped once more to look back. The lion had risen to her feet again, the fawn tucked between her legs. Snowflakes swirled around them in the fading light, the kind of image that would live forever on camera, but somehow felt too sacred to capture. When Daniel finally returned to the truck, the sky was turning violet. The drive down the mountain was quiet except for the crunch of tires and the steady hum of the engine. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Back at the outpost, Mason was waiting, arms crossed. "You look like hell," he said. "You went up there, didn't you?" Daniel pulled off his gloves, flexing stiff fingers. "She's alive." "And the deer?" "Still with her." Mason shook his head. "That's not possible. Nature doesn't rewrite its own rules." Daniel looked at him, eyes tired but certain. "Maybe it does when it needs to." He dropped his coat, walked to the window, and stared out at the dark line of the mountains. Somewhere up there, a lion and a deer were huddled in the cold, surviving together. He wondered if anyone outside these walls would believe it. Later that night, he typed his report. The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting for words that didn't exist. He started with the facts: coordinates, weather, species behavior, but the language felt too small, too scientific. He deleted everything and wrote a single sentence instead. Observed. Continued cooperation between mountain lion and deer. Predator protecting prey from external threats. Suggest ongoing observation for behavioral anomaly. He stared at it, then added a final note, almost to himself. Sometimes the wild doesn't need to be understood. It just needs to be witnessed. When he turned off the light, the mountains were already cloaked in shadow. Somewhere in that darkness, the lion lay beside the fawn, snow falling softly over both of them. And in the outpost below, a man who had spent his life studying the laws of nature began to wonder if mercy might be one of them. Outside, the wind moved through the burned trees like a whisper. Tomorrow, it would carry the scent of thawing earth and pine needles again. Life would find its way forward, the way it always did, quietly, defiantly, one impossible choice at a time. The storm arrived without warning. One of those mountain tempests that seems to fall out of nowhere, thick as smoke and twice as cruel. By late afternoon, the wind had turned the valley into a white tunnel. Snow swept sideways, blotting out the ridge entirely. At the outpost, the windows rattled, and every antenna groaned under the weight of ice. Ranger Daniel Reyes stood at the control table, eyes locked on the blinking GPS monitor. The lion's signal was still there, faint but unmoving. For the last 6 hours, the coordinates hadn't shifted a single yard. The storm had frozen everything. He could picture it too clearly. The cave half buried, the lion trapped, the small deer pressed against her for warmth. Mason came in from the equipment bay, shaking snow off his jacket. "Don't even say it," he warned. "We can't go out there." Daniel didn't answer. He was already pulling his gloves on. "Reyes, I mean it. The avalanche risk is off the chart. You'll get halfway up that ridge and disappear." "Then at least I'll disappear doing something that matters," Daniel said quietly. Mason swore under his breath. "You're going to get yourself killed over a lion and a deer." Daniel paused at the door, meeting his gaze. You ever watch something pure enough to make you forget how broken the world is? I have. And I'm not letting it die in the dark. He stepped out before Mason could reply. The wind slammed into him like a living thing. Snow sliced through the air, sharp as glass. He hunched low and started the snowmobile. The engine roared to life, a small defiance against the endless white. The climb was brutal. The headlights caught only fragments of the road ahead. A flash of rock, a tree limb, nothing more. The higher he went, the harder the snow fell, until the world became a blur of motion and noise. When the snowmobile finally refused to go farther, he abandoned it and continued on foot, leaning into the wind. Every step was a fight. The drifts reached his waist. He could feel the cold crawling into his bones. But he pressed on, following the faint pulse of the GPS tracker strapped to his wrist. Somewhere ahead, buried in the storm, was the cave. When he finally saw it, it was almost too late. The mouth of the cave had collapsed halfway, snow packed thick against the entrance. His flashlight beam barely reached inside, but he could make out two shapes, one large, one small, motionless. Daniel dropped to his knees and started digging. His gloves froze stiff, his breath burning in his chest, but he kept going. The snow gave way slowly, reluctantly, until at last he broke through to fur. Warmth still radiated from beneath. "Hey there," he whispered hoarsely. "Hang on, girl." The mountain lion's eyes opened, heavy and glassy. She didn't move, didn't snarl, just watched him with the faint recognition of something she no longer feared. Beneath her body, the small deer stirred weakly, faint tremor of life. Daniel worked faster, clearing snow from around them. The lion tried to lift her head, failed, and let it fall back down. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. The fawn's heartbeat fluttered like a trapped bird. "You saved it," Daniel said softly. "Now let me save you." He pulled the emergency blanket from his pack, wrapping it around the fawn first. The little creature blinked at him, dazed. Then he slid a heating pad under the lion's chest, careful to keep his movements slow. She watched him the whole time, trusting him the way wild things almost never do. When the last of his gear was set, he touched the radio at his shoulder. "Base, this is Reyes. I found them. Both alive but hypothermic. I'm starting extraction prep. Over." Static hissed through the speaker. The storm swallowed the signal. Daniel looked at the two animals again, snow still swirling around them. "Guess it's just us," he said. He lifted the fawn carefully into his arms. It was lighter than he expected, bones and warmth wrapped in fur. As he turned to leave, he hesitated. The lion had closed her eyes again, her sides rising slowly. He knelt beside her and rested a gloved hand on her shoulder. "I'll come back for you," he said, his voice breaking through the roar of wind. "I promise." She didn't move, but her tail twitched once, the faintest acknowledgement. Then the snow surged around them again, and the world went white. Daniel fought his way back down the slope, every step heavier than the last. By the time he reached the tree line, the wind had stripped the warmth from his body. He stumbled into the clearing where his snowmobile waited, engine already half buried. Somehow, he managed to start it and keep it upright all the way back to the outpost. The lights of the base glowed through the storm like a promise. Mason and Dr. Elena Morales burst out as the door flew open, helping Daniel inside. He sank to the floor, clutching the fawn against his chest. "Get her warm," he rasped. "Now." Elena didn't waste a second. She wrapped the deer in thick towels, rubbed its legs, and checked its eyes with a flashlight. Pulse is weak, but she's alive. Mason turned to Daniel. Where's the lion? Still up there? Then she's dead, Mason said flatly. Daniel looked up, his eyes hard. Not yet. He staggered to his feet, shaking from exhaustion. As soon as this clears, we're going back. Elena touched his arm. You can't. You'll freeze. We'll wait for dawn. Daniel stared at the window. Outside, the wind screamed like a living thing. She didn't wait, he said. She stayed to save it. The least we can do is try. The three of them stood there, listening to the storm batter the walls. The fawn stirred in Elena's arms, tiny legs twitching. Its breathing steadied. It would live. Daniel sank onto the bench, head in his hands. In the corner, a monitor blinked weakly, the GPS still pulsing from the ridge. She was alive. Barely, but alive. Outside, the storm raged on, reshaping the world. But in that small room, something larger was taking shape too. A decision, quiet but unshakable. As the wind howled against the outpost, Daniel whispered to no one in particular. Some things you don't measure in data. Some things you measure in mercy. He closed his eyes, hearing the echo of the lion's breathing in the back of his mind. Tomorrow, the storm would break. Tomorrow, they would go back for her. And when they did, the mountain would remember that not every fight was meant for survival. Some were meant for redemption. By dawn, the storm had quieted to a whisper. The mountains looked almost peaceful again, but Daniel Reyes knew what kind of peace it was. The heavy kind that comes after a battle no one should have survived. The outpost generator hummed softly, filling the silence that followed the night's chaos. In the small medical bay, the rescued fawn lay on a folded blanket beneath a heat lamp. Its breathing was slow but steady. Every few minutes, it would flick its ears or twitch its legs as if running in a dream. Dr. Elena Morales, her dark hair pulled into a tight braid, checked the animal's vitals and smiled faintly. She's stabilizing, she said. I think she's going to make it. Daniel nodded, exhausted but awake. And the lion? Elena's smile faded. If she's still up there, we have a small window before hypothermia finishes what the storm started. We'll need a team, a snowcat, and warming gear. I'll go, Daniel said immediately. You're not exactly in condition for heroics. He glanced at the bandage wrapped around his hand, then shrugged. Neither is she. 2 hours later, the rescue team was ready. The sun struggled through thin clouds as they climbed toward the ridge. The air still bit like glass, but the wind had died. And for the first time in days, the mountain's breath came easy. When they reached the cave, Daniel's heart sank. The entrance was nearly buried again, the snow refrozen into hard layers. They dug in silence, metal shovels clinking against ice, until at last the hole widened enough for light to spill inside. She was there. The mountain lion lay half buried in frost, her fur rimed with ice. For a moment, Daniel thought they were too late. Then her chest lifted, a faint, ragged motion. She's alive, Elena whispered. They worked quickly. Elena knelt beside the lion, her gloved hand resting near the animal's shoulder. Pulse is weak but present. We'll have to move fast. Daniel helped ease the stretcher under her, careful to avoid her claws. Even unconscious, her muscles twitched with the instinct to fight. The tranquilizer gun stayed at Elena's side, unused. No drugs, she said. She's done enough fighting for one lifetime. The snowcat groaned as it carried them back down the slope. Inside, the cabin smelled of wet fur and antiseptic. Daniel sat beside the stretcher, watching the lion's sides rise and fall. He could feel her strength even now. Thin, fading, but still there. At the outpost, the small rescue center had been converted into a makeshift wildlife ward. Heat lamps cast a golden glow across the room. The fawn lay awake in its enclosure, eyes wide as the door opened and the lion was brought in. Its ears twitched, and a low bleat escaped its throat. "She recognizes her," Elena said quietly. "Or maybe it's the other way around." They laid the lion on a padded mat and wrapped her in heated blankets. Sensors blinked to life, heart rate, temperature, oxygen levels. The machines hummed like distant music. For hours, Daniel and Elena worked in rhythm. Warming fluids, gentle massages to restart circulation, careful monitoring. By late afternoon, the lion's breathing had deepened. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharp. She lifted her head slightly, scanning the room. Daniel froze, unsure whether to step back or stay still. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe." Her gaze found the sound of the fawn's soft bleat. Across the room, the small deer stood at the glass partition, trembling but unafraid. The lion's body relaxed. She laid her head down again, eyes never leaving the tiny creature. "That's recognition," Elena murmured, "not confusion." Daniel felt something in his chest loosen, a quiet relief that words couldn't carry. "She's checking on it," he said. Elena nodded. Maybe she wants to make sure it's really safe now. The two of them stood there for a long moment, watching predator and prey connected by something larger than instinct. It wasn't science. It wasn't logic. It was something older and simpler. Trust. That night, the outpost lights dimmed to a soft amber. The wind outside had died completely. In the ward, the lion and the fawn rested side by side, separated only by a thin pane of reinforced glass. Daniel sat in the observation booth, writing notes that didn't sound like research anymore. Day 6. Both subjects stabilized. The fawn feeds well. The mountain lion responsive to sound, calm in the presence of caretakers. When the fawn calls, the lion lifts her head. Possible bond retention beyond situational stress. He stopped, tapped his pen against the page, then added one more line. "This is not an accident of biology. It's a choice." When he looked up, Elena had joined him, sipping from a thermos. "You know HQ's going to turn this into a press piece," she said. "Conservation miracle, predator compassion, interspecies empathy, easy clicks, better funding. Maybe even an insurance ad about protecting life." Daniel smiled faintly. "If it keeps the lights on, fine. But let's make sure they get the story right." "Which part?" "The part where mercy costs something," he said. "And it's still worth it." They watched through the glass as the lion shifted, curling slightly closer to the glass wall. The fawn did the same, pressing its small body against the transparent barrier. Two shapes divided by safety, united by survival. Elena exhaled. "Do you think they'd survive in the wild again?" Daniel hesitated. "Together? Probably not. But maybe that's not the point." She gave him a curious look. "Maybe it's enough to know it could happen at all," he said. As the night deepened, the lion slept peacefully, her breathing slow and sure. The fawn lay near the glass, its eyes half closed. The rhythmic hum of machines filled them. Silence. Outside, stars broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. The peaks of the Sierra shimmered silver in the moonlight. Daniel leaned back in his chair, letting the quiet wrap around him. Tomorrow would bring reports, meetings, and data sheets. There would be debates over what it meant, over whether nature had changed, or if humans had simply failed to understand it all along. But for now, the story was simpler. A lion had chosen compassion over hunger. A man had chosen hope over rules. And somewhere between the two, a small deer had learned that even in a brutal world, kindness could still find a way to breathe. Daniel turned off his desk lamp and stood by the glass one last time before leaving. The lion's tail twitched once, as if acknowledging him. He smiled. "Rest easy," he whispered. "You earned it." As he stepped outside, cold air filled his lungs. The sky above was endless and quiet. For the first time since the fire, Daniel believed that the wilderness wasn't just recovering, it was forgiving. Spring came slowly that year, almost as if the mountain wasn't sure it was ready to start again. The snow melted in uneven patches, leaving rivers of clear water cutting through dark soil. Sap bled down the sides of pines that had survived the fire, and soft shoots of green broke through the ash. The Sierra Nevada, scarred but breathing, began to remember what it felt like to live. Inside the state wildlife facility, light spilled through tall glass windows onto two enclosures, one holding a full-grown mountain lion, the other a young deer now strong enough to run again. Months had passed since the storm. But for Daniel Reyes, time still moved with the same weight it had that night. He stood by the observation window, coffee cooling in his hands, watching as the lion paced the edge of her pen. "She's restless," said Dr. Elena Morales, joining him. "She's ready," Daniel replied. Elena studied the monitors. "Vitals are perfect. Reflexes sharp. She's hunting the shadows again. It's time." Daniel glanced at the smaller enclosure. The deer, its legs healed, its coat glossy, was nibbling at a branch of fresh willow. "And her?" "Born to be out there," Elena said softly. "But headquarters wants them released separately. Different zones, minimal human attention. They don't want another headline about miracles. They want routine science." Daniel smiled without humor. "Nature doesn't do routine." A week later, the transport trucks wound up the mountain road, tires crunching through gravel and mud. The air was clear enough to taste. Daniel rode in the back of one truck, sitting beside the lion's cage. She was calm, eyes half-lidded but alert, her tail sweeping slowly across the metal floor. The hum of the engine filled the silence. When the convoy reached the high meadow, Daniel stepped out first. Before him stretched a valley untouched by the fire. Rolling grass, patches of pine, the glitter of a thawing stream. It was the kind of place where the air felt young again. Elena joined him, clipboard in hand. "Zone 5, she said. "Designated safe release site. Minimal predators, plenty of browse, fresh water access. Perfect for the deer." Daniel looked toward the second truck, where the young doe, once a fawn, stood trembling in her transport pen. Her ears twitched, nostrils flaring at the smell of open air. Elena gestured toward the ridge. "The lion's zone is 2 miles north. We'll release her first." Daniel hesitated. "She won't go far." "That's fine," Elena said, "as long as she's free." They opened the cage door. The lion stepped out with slow, deliberate grace. The sun struck her coat, turning it from gold to fire. For a moment, she stood perfectly still, taking in the wind, the trees, the vastness of space that no cage could hold. Then, without a sound, she walked into the grass, disappeared between the shadows of the pines. Hours later, as dusk began to fall, the team released the deer. It bounded into the meadow, uncertain at first, then sure-footed and strong. Daniel watched until it vanished down the slope toward the stream. He felt the ache of an ending that wasn't quite an ending at all. Back at the facility, reports were written, videos archived, and press releases drafted. Keywords like wildlife conservation, habitat protection, and sustainable ecosystem insurance filled the memos. phrases that sold well, but carried little of what the story truly meant. Daniel signed the paperwork anyway, knowing some stories didn't belong to people. Weeks passed. Spring deepened into early summer. And then, one morning, a drone camera flying over Zone 5 picked up movement. A large shape and a smaller one moving together near the stream. Daniel got the alert on his monitor before sunrise. He stared at the footage, heart pounding. The image sharpened. A mountain lion, walking slowly along the bank. A few yards behind her, the young deer grazed among the ferns. Not fleeing, not hiding. Just there, existing in quiet rhythm beside the shadow that should have been its end. Elena stepped into the room, blinking at the screen. "You're kidding me." Daniel shook his head, smiling. "Nope. They're not hunting or chasing. They're just together. Looks like it." The drone circled, catching a moment that felt too perfect to belong to the wild. The lion lowering her head to drink from the stream, while the deer stood close enough to see her reflection in the same water. "They chose each other," Elena whispered. Daniel nodded. And the mountain chose Mercy again. That evening, after the footage had made its way through the department, the story leaked to the public. Just a few still frames, shared by someone who believed the world needed hope. It spread quietly, then everywhere. News outlets picked it up under headlines like "Predator Protects Prey, Nature's Lesson in Compassion." Environmental groups launched donation campaigns. Insurance companies even ran ads quoting the story's moral about protecting what truly matters. Daniel found the whole thing both surreal and beautiful. "If compassion helps sell coverage," he told Elena, "I'll take it." But the real story wasn't on the screens. It was up there, in the mountains where no one could see. A week later, Daniel hiked to the same ridge alone. The valley below glowed in the late afternoon sun. The stream shimmered like glass. And then he saw them, just for a heartbeat. The lion resting under a cedar, her eyes half closed, while the deer grazed nearby. When the breeze shifted, the lion's ears flicked, but she didn't move. She just watched, calm and quiet, as the deer lifted its head and looked back. Daniel lowered his binoculars and smiled. "Guess some rules are worth breaking," he murmured. He sat there until the light faded, until both figures melted into the growing shadows. Back at the base, he wrote his final field entry, Day 142. Both animals confirmed thriving. Continued coexistence observed. No aggression. Predator and prey functioning in shared territory. Conclusion: the wild does not always seek balance through violence. Sometimes it finds it through grace. He paused, pen hovering, then added, "If Mercy can live here, maybe the world isn't lost yet." The report ended there, but Daniel didn't send it. Some truths belong to the mountain. Outside the window, twilight settled over the peaks. The wind carried the scent of rain and pine, and somewhere far beyond the tree line, two lives moved in quiet harmony. Proof that even the oldest laws of nature could bend for something stronger than survival. And for the first time since the fire, Daniel let himself believe that Mercy wasn't just a miracle. It was a way of living. 2 years later, the scars of the Great Fire were almost invisible. The mountain had healed in quiet defiance, turning ash into soil and soil into bloom. Young pines now stood where the forest once burned black. Rivers carved fresh veins through the valley, their banks lined with willow and fern. The Sierra Nevada, patient as ever, had rewritten its own story. Daniel Reyes parked his truck at the edge of the same ridge where it had all begun. The air smelled of pine resin and rain. He stepped out slowly, his knees stiff from age and cold, and stared toward the far slope. He hadn't been back since the release day. Part of him hadn't wanted to break the spell. Now, with retirement only a month away, he'd come to see for himself whether the miracle had truly lasted, or if it had simply drifted into legend like everything else people stopped believing in. He adjusted his binoculars and scanned the valley. The grass shimmered under the late afternoon sun, bending in ripples of green and gold. Then, movement. Just a flicker at first. A shape slipping between the trees. The mountain lion. She was older now. Her coat had dulled to a dusty bronze, her stride slower, but still powerful. She paused beside a stream and lowered her head to drink, her reflection rippling across the water. Then another shape appeared. A deer, larger now, her flanks strong and steady. She stepped lightly down the bank, cautious but calm, and began to drink beside the lion. Daniel lowered the binoculars, a smile pulling at his face. "You made it," he whispered. He sat down on a rock, watching the two animals in silence. The deer lifted her head, ears twitching. Behind her, in the dappled shade, a smaller shape moved awkwardly on new legs. A fawn, spotted and bright-eyed. The mountain lion turned her head toward it, but didn't move. She simply lay down beside the stream, closing her eyes as if to guard without guarding. Daniel's throat tightened. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was legacy. Compassion passed down in a way no one could measure. Proof that kindness, once chosen, had a way of teaching itself. He thought of the world beyond these mountains. Headlines about conflict and greed, endless chatter about markets, algorithms, insurance policies, and data. All of it trying to calculate the cost of safety. But here, in this quiet valley, safety didn't come from control. It came from mercy. He raised his camera and took one photo, not for the reports, not for the news feeds that had long forgotten the story, but for himself. The image froze time. A lion resting in the grass, a deer and her newborn standing close by. The light between them so soft, it looked like forgiveness made visible. When the shutter clicked, the lion's ears turned. She looked up, her eyes catching the sun. For a moment, Daniel felt that same pulse of recognition he'd felt 2 winters ago in the storm. The silent understanding that some lives are connected beyond reason. He lowered the camera slowly and nodded, as if to an old friend. He stayed there until evening. The mountains shifted from gold to violet. The deer led her fawn up the hill, stopping once to glance back. The lion followed a few steps behind, her tail sweeping the grass. Then they disappeared into the line of trees, leaving only the hush of the stream and the smell of rain. As the first stars appeared, Daniel packed up his things. Before he left, he opened his old field notebook, the same one he'd carried through the blizzard, and wrote his final entry, Day 731. The story continues. The mountain remembers mercy, and so does its wild heart. He closed the notebook and tucked it into his coat. The wind carried a low hum through the pines, almost like a voice. Maybe it was just the sound of nature turning another page. Maybe it was something more. The drive down the mountain was quiet. The night sky glowed with the thin silver of a waning moon. He thought about how the world measured success in numbers, in profit, policy, prediction. But none of those things could explain what he'd witnessed. You couldn't ensure mercy. You could only choose it once and hope it spread. When he reached the base station, Elena was waiting by the porch, leaning against the railing with a mug of coffee. Her hair had gone gray at the temples, her eyes still sharp. "So?" she asked. Daniel smiled. "They're alive, both of them." she exhaled, relief softening her face. And the little one? Healthy, he said. The deer had a fawn. The lion still watches over them. Elena laughed quietly. Nature's strangest love story. He nodded, or maybe just the truest. They sat together for a while, watching the dark line of the horizon. The radio inside crackled with static from another ranger's call, routine updates about weather patterns, park alerts, maintenance schedules. The world kept moving, as it always did. After a moment, Elena spoke again. You ever wonder why she did it? Why the lion spared that deer in the first place? Daniel thought about it. Maybe she lost something once, and mercy was the only way to fill what was missing. Or maybe she just reminded the world that nature isn't cruel. It's honest. And sometimes, honesty looks like kindness. Elena smiled faintly. You should write that down. I just did, he said, tapping his coat pocket. The night deepened, and the sound of the river carried through the trees. Daniel stood, looking one last time toward the mountains. I'm done chasing stories, he said. The best ones keep living without us. As he drove away, the headlights cut a narrow path through the dark. Behind him, the forest glowed faintly under the moon, endless and forgiving. Somewhere up there, a lion watched over her strange little family. In a world obsessed with what can be measured, profit, protection, survival, she had proved something that couldn't. That the most powerful instinct of all isn't hunger or fear. It's mercy. And in that mercy, the mountain found its peace again.